Let's discuss the writing test breakdown. So this is always going to be section 2 or test 2. You're always going to do this after reading, but before math. You're always going to be given 35 minutes to complete 44 questions. The instructions are right here, the directions to this section. We're just going to read them once, and then you'll never have to read them again. There's not really much very interesting in them, but we'll just get this out of the way. So each passage below is accompanied by a number of questions. For some questions, you will consider how the passage might be revised to improve the expression of ideas. This, by the way, as we'll talk about in a second, are the rhetorical skills questions. For other questions, you will consider how the passage might be edited to correct errors in sentence structure, usage, or punctuation. This we're going to call grammar, the grammar questions. A passage or a question may be accompanied by one or more graphics, such as a table or a graph, that you will consider as you make revising and editing decisions. Some questions will direct you to an underlined portion of the passage. Other questions will direct you to a location in a passage or ask you to think about the passage as a whole. I'll show you what they mean by that in a second. After reading each passage, choose the answer to each question that most effectively improves the quality of writing in the passage or that makes the passage conform to the conventions of standard written English. Many questions include a no change option. Choose that option if you think the best choice is to leave the relevant portion of the passage as it is. So, very straightforward, nothing much of a surprise there. Structure of the passage, you're always going to have 4 passages. Each will have 11 questions. You'll always have one narrative passage. That's a passage like from a story or from memoir or something more personal, more of conversational. Then the other 3 will be some combination of informative passages, telling you about some particular topic, or argumentative passages, making an argument and trying to persuade you of something. The topics are basically going to be some mix of career-related passages, humanities, history/social studies, and science. The questions are approximately a 50-50 mix of grammar and rhetorical skills, and we saw a little bit of intro of what that means up here. For more specific examples of grammar, we're going to go through all of these, but these types of questions would be things like subject-verb agreement, pronoun agreement, punctuation use, sentence structure, idioms, etc. Rhetorical skills are things like adding or deleting or revising sentences, providing smooth transitions, sentence arrangement, etc. There is some blur between these categories. Sometimes some people might categorize, idioms as being more rhetorical skills, or combining sentences as something either grammatical or rhetorical. So there's a little bit of overlap, but we can just say it's about a 50-50 mix approximately. Here's a sample of what a particular SAT reading test or writing test looks like. Notice each of these question boxes corresponds to a box in the passage, and when that box is next to something underlined, you have to see which of these choices best replaces, if any, the original. If the original is good, you would pick A. Now, sometimes, as we see in 4, there is nothing underlined associated with that particular part of the passage. So in this case, what we're going to be doing is adding something. In other cases, we might delete a previous sentence, add a whole sentence, make a analysis of the passage as a whole. Like if this were at the end of the passage, like if this said number 11 in a box at the end, a lot of times that's about the passage as a whole. But if it's not associated with any particular underlined portion, you can just imagine that we are making the insertion or the change right there, or at least we are stopping at that point to understand what the question is asking. So that's what the passage looks like. So pacing isn't really going to be an issue for the majority of students. I don't think most students are going to have issues with time here. But if you are having issues with time, the typical advice of making sure to circle and return on harder questions is usually very effective. So if there's a question that's giving you a lot of trouble and you feel like you're going to have to spend a number of minutes figuring it out, rereading the passage and reading the choices and blah, 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 those are questions you want to circle, maybe put a guess on, but circle them, finish everything else, and then come back later, because it's much better if you make a guess on that one question because you just didn't have enough time to figure it out, versus spending 5 minutes on that one question and then having to make a guess on 4 questions, which are much easier, right? So you want to make sure you complete all the easy stuff first before you worry about these harder questions. So if you're having an issue with pacing, try this. But I think as you practice and get used to this, the pacing won't be as much of an issue. And then finally, there's no order of difficulty. So there's no, while there is a mix of easy, medium, and hard questions, we have no sense just based on the number of the question, whether it's going to be easy, medium, or hard. So we just have to treat really question difficulty, right? What makes a hard question is more going to be a personal thing. If the question is hard for you, That's what matters, not so much if it's hard in general or hard in a statistical sense.